In this video, I kind of want to talk about the history of Striker X and where it's kind of come from, where it started, how many years it's been. And yeah, today Striker X is an ongoing manga series that I recently started posting on multiple platforms. But specifically, if you guys want to check out my work, I'd like to point you guys to VoyceMe. You can download the app or check it out on the website. And the reason why is because they have a little competition that I'm hoping to get some, recognition from at least. This is my little passion project and would be awesome if it got to see a little more eyes. So if you're interested in checking out my work after you watch this video, please go check out Striker X on VoiceMe. But let's get back into the video. So, Striker X is a comic that I've been developing literally since I was in middle school. And I have the evidence right here. When I was a kid, I was a big fan of manga and comics, and I, like many others, decided, hey, I want to make my own, and I think it'd be a fun little project. And obviously, it became a little more than just a project. I'll tell you that. There's a lot of stuff here. And I kind of just want to go over that because, one, it's fun for me to reflect. And in general, if you're an artist or a writer or any creator in general, looking back on your old stuff really puts into perspective how much you've grown as an artist, because this is the cover for, I think, chapter 4 that I released this version of this story. And seeing this and comparing it to, the very first cover drawing that I ever did when I was like 11 years old, it makes you laugh because, one, it's hard to say that this is something that the same person has made. And it really shows how much a person can really change when they're willing to put in the effort to become a better artist and writer. Since I was 11 years old, you can see that this comic was very amateurish. So what I actually did in the beginning was I made my comics on lined paper. I made the drawings on lined paper, and they were all pencil drawings. There was like no inking or anything like that. And what I had to do was I scanned in those pages. And again, these were lined notebook drawing pages. And you can see, like, if you get in close, the lines in the background from them being that. But I scanned these pages in, and I didn't even know what Photoshop was when I was 11. So I used Microsoft Paint to put in the text on each of these bubbles. And 2011 MS Paint was really bad. Like, for example, you couldn't rotate the text box. So I had to just do this because I couldn't rotate the text. Or maybe I didn't know how, because again, I was 11 years old trying to figure out how to use my family's computer. Not only was the art very amateurish, but the story was way below any sort of standard I would even give myself today. There was no structure to the plot. I just had ideas and I just put them on paper as they came to me. So I already had ideas for the villains and the heroes and their dynamics. And that definitely has developed and evolved since then. Oh my gosh. And here's an example of the bad writing that was really present. So we have the team's first encounter with the person that ends up becoming their master. And I just have this one panel that is basically a time skip. So they meet the master, they train for a couple years. I said 3 years here. And then they are about to meet their first villain by the end of the second chapter. And this actually was a problem that I almost had with this version of the comic, because in my mind, what I thought needed to happen in order for people to really like this comic after they pick it up for the first time is that action's got to be at the beginning of the story. And I sort of believe that as well, because in the first chapter, there is a tease of the action of other characters in that first chapter, but then we switch to the main character, and the first interactions that the reader will have with the main character isn't exactly action. These first few chapters of the story, I actually decided to focus on character development, because that is the real thing that I believe will hook the readers into really loving your story, or loving my story. I don't know if you are making a comic. I'm trying to talk about my own experiences on this channel and not really trying to teach anyone one way or another how to do things, because I'm really just going about this my own way, and I'm trying to figure out how to, try to find my own success on my own path. So I'm not really trying to teach you guys what is working. I'm just trying to show you guys my path from the beginning and where I am now. And that's where I am documenting this series on YouTube. But yeah, as far as volume 1 goes of this, it took me about a year to make. And after I did it, I kind of stapled it together. And my goal with it really was to just show my friends at school. And, I had friends that were really big into anime and manga. I was at that point where in American society, it was shifting from nerds being uncool to like people really liking comics and anime. So I kind of benefited from that because I was always a natural born like nerd and a big fan of this stuff. Still didn't help with my social anxiety though, I'll tell you that. But yeah, this was a fun little thing and it kept me going because there were actually people that were asking about when the next story was gonna happen. And yeah, I'm missing like the back page of this, but it's something that I'm not too worried about because these are old pages. But yeah, 2011 was the year I made Striker X Volume 1. And then in the next year, I made Volume 2. So I guess this would be 2012. And again, this was done on lined paper. And this is actually the original lined paper that I used. You can see that there's drawings in here. This is a flashback that I'm really excited to adapt into the current version of this. But yeah, the same process that I went through with Volume 1, I did with this one. Scanned in these really crappily looking line art pages, and then I printed them out. What I really liked about this volume is that I was actually getting into the world building and the various characters that are in this world. Not just the main characters, but the villains. I have like sort of two villains, one sympathetic, one unsympathetic villain. And that's something that I really wanted to dive more into in Volume 2, along with the trio of main characters learning more about the world of the wielders. They end up meeting this new character that can manipulate sound. And I'm actually in the point in my story right now in today's version where I'm actually redoing this part. So they're about to go into this new dimension where the wielders basically use as their home base. And it's hopefully going to be a bit cooler than this because, like I said before, there's like a panel of the reveal and it's not that dramatic. And ideally, if I were to like do this again, the welcome to the training realm. And by the way, the training realm is not the name I'm going to call it anymore. I have a different name that hopefully you guys think the new name for this dimension will sound a little more clever. But I'll save that reveal for the story. Since this is like a sort of shonen series, there are like battles that happen. But the problem is that like I just kind of introduce these characters and they just start fighting because I want them to start fighting. And when I do this in the new version, I'm going to be sure to really characterize these people first and give them a reason to fight, especially now that I have like a more of an understanding of these characters that I have. I think the story will actually end up being a lot better and it will make sense more to the readers as I keep going. Now, here is Volume 3. Now, this one was in 2013, so this would have been when I was in 8th grade. And I believe I would be 13 years old. Another early prototype of the logo here. Got some new characters showing up. A little deep dive on the elders, which are really big for the story right now. And with Volume 3, this is actually when I switched to working on regular paper instead of lined paper. And this copy right here is the original, so you don't see the text that I would have done in MS Paint. This is literally just the original pencil drawings that I would show my friends. And I think the reason why I made those copies before of Volumes 1 and 2 is because I was expecting maybe if for some weird reason people wanted to buy these copies from me that I could sell them for like maybe $1 or maybe $5. But even then, that was just like kind of crazy to think about. Now, here's an example of like the drama that I want to have be present in the story. And what I'm talking about is the visual storytelling. I'm using these panels as a sequence, in which that's something that I was doing from the beginning, but sequential storytelling and then ending on a big panel was something that was new to me and was a point where I was learning more about sequential storytelling and the use of different manga panels for different effects that it can have on the reader. I like this bit right here because I have this character. The bit for this character is that they're kind of old looking, but they hate being called old. And so when Hez kind of calls this guy old nonchalantly, even though the hints were there that you probably don't want to call this guy old, he just like walks up to a tree and throws it at him. He's like, what the hell? I don't know, I think it's funny. Again, here with the world building that was super important to me at the time, get introduced to a new wielder who transports them to meet the elders of the wielders organization. Get a bit of a lore drop here. Here's another problem that I had early on, is that whenever I did go into like writing and lore dropping, it was mainly just characters. They were talking to each other, but they were talking to the reader. And I'm really just telling the reader, hey, this is the history. And these you need to know about it, therefore these characters need to know about it. And I don't know if I'm gonna go about it the same way. I sort of already have written a few scenes where lore is given to the reader, but the characters do know about it, but another character won't know about the wielders and therefore won't know about the background of the wielders. So I think that will be an easier way of going about giving information about the world in the story. Yeah, volume 3. Cool drawing right here. So at night, Richard is jumping into the sky and the moonlight will be lit behind him. If I want to recreate this manga panel, it's going to be really cool because this is obviously pretty amateurish. I kind of hate the drawing. Just like look at the way I drew the hands. Like you can see like the idea. I was just really bad at drawing people, and so I hadn't learned how to really up that yet. But I always had an eye for composition. And I think you can probably tell if you look at my stuff right now. Yeah, okay, and that's the end. We get a tease of a new villain at the end of volume 3. Now I put this here because I wanted to remember, at this point in time, I wanted to introduce a world. Because I was inspired by Naruto. My main inspiration was Naruto at the time, and what I loved is that there were so many characters. And fast forward to today, I actually have a huge appreciation for One Piece because within the last few years, I realized the story that I want to tell actually has a lot more in common with One Piece rather than Naruto, even though Naruto was my original inspiration. And I think that can clearly be seen with me laying out so many characters and abilities that can be used. What I did on this sheet was that I made character names of characters I already knew, and then I also made abilities. And these abilities were stand-ins for characters because I knew I wanted this ability to be in my story. I just didn't know what character would have this ability yet. So an easy way for me to just put it down so I know that it'll be a thing later is just writing down the abilities. And then I just put names with those abilities. And I kind of wonder if Oda, the creator of One Piece, did something similar, but I don't know. I have actually multiple versions of this list. Obviously, because this one is breaking down. I used to carry around a notebook, and it kind of evolved. If you knew me in high school and in college for that, I had this big binder that I carried around, and people called it my comics binder, even though it was just like my personal binder because I was just so obsessed with these comics. It was filled with all of this like stuff that I did. I even put like homework from school in that binder every once in a while because I thought of it as just my personal binder. But whenever I would show people my stuff, they'd be like, oh, you really love doing this. And I had this like 3-ring binder that was just full of all the stuff. All right, let's go to volume 4. And as you can see, this is, I believe, the point where I had made this logo. Early version of what will end up being the logo for the series. As far as I can tell, this is what the final logo is right now. It's definitely the present logo. I don't know if it's going to evolve more as I continue publishing my current series of this, or current version of this series, but the version I have right now is very close to the version I have here. Well, I think it's pretty close. But yeah, from here on, from volume 4 onward, I started using that logo. I think this is also the time where I was interested in coloring more, although I still did the coloring on paper. At some point, I was experimenting with coloring my comics in MS Paint because I still didn't have Photoshop. Also, I think volume 4, this probably would have been my freshman year in high school. I had a little bit of polish with the way I would render. I really discovered the effect of light and contrast. And so having the light come from these doors as they exit into the night, I hope you can like see the vision that I had for this panel with them leaving. Again, it's very amateurish, but the vision is there. So they start training, they meet up with these 2 new wielders that when I introduce these characters, they won't have met. But since I basically based these characters off of my friends that I had in middle school and high school, I had the characters already know them because I already knew the characters, but that doesn't really make sense. So when I do introduce these 2 new characters, they will be brand new, not only to the audience, but also to the main characters. And you can see that the level of detail is increasing more and more as I keep drawing these comics. Like I'm introducing this piece of tech for them to use. The way I drew the hand was a bit better. Definitely needs a lot of improvement, but this was already like a really good drawing for me compared to what I was doing before. But then there's panels like this where everyone's jumping into the forest, and this guy is like being left behind because, you know, they're starting the training right now, and he's like, oh, you mean right now? But them just like leaping into this forest, like the trees are very basically drawn because I didn't really have the time, or did I really know how to really do that? Because again, while I'm making all these comics, I'm still in school. At this point, I'm in high school now. I'm trying to figure out what I could do with my career, because at this time, this was 100% a hobby, and I was thinking about going into engineering, and I was even at that specific school for engineering as well. So it's kind of obvious that I became an artist because I was so passionate about this. And not only this, but also I paint as well. You can actually see I have a little bit of paint on my hands. It was pretty obvious to everyone around me that if I did make the decision to become an artist rather than studying engineering, that made sense for me. And I'm lucky that I was able to get where I am today with my career, with my full-time job, because I'm not doing comics full-time yet. But my full-time job I do have because of my pursuits in the world of art and animation. I really like this panel right here because it's sort of me visually telling the reader lore about the wielders. Even though it's not 100% clear, my idea with this is that there was a history of wielders and information that these characters can access for guidance. If, for example, they didn't have the ability to trust people around them. It's kind of a weird book to be just lying on the shelf, Secrets of the Wielders. So I'm probably not going to do this specifically again, but I like the idea of having a library of wielder information that these characters can reference. And I have one character specifically named Sarah, who's probably going to be at the library very often because of her own inclinations as a poet, but also I'm not going to spoil what her ability is. But when you meet the character Sarah, know that her ability will be not only very important to the story, but her having access to information to a library like this will be super important for her character and the way that she will affect the plot of the series. Again, I really love I love that I was finally playing with shading. So again, another great example of me discovering the power of shading and how light and darkness can really level up your storytelling and drawing skills, just if you have the knowledge of how to use it. At this point though, I was still only using pencils to draw everything, so no inking whatsoever. And then I transitioned to this new villain over in, I'm sure you can read that, Italy. I used to live in Italy as a kid, so this is why I wanted to have an arc early on take place in Italy. The memories are a little vague for me, but I think I actually went to this location, which is why I wanted to draw it. Got a cool fight here with some police officers, but then a local wielder that happens to be here gets involved. The way I'm going to go about the introduction of this villain, by the way, is actually a lot different. So maybe I shouldn't be too worried about spoiling. But yeah. Oh, this is also another thing that I want to explore in the story. I introduced like this page of these young wielders kind of questioning whether or not their leaders are telling them the truth. And I kind of like that. I don't personally like to question authority a lot. That's just my demeanor. But I think it's still good to question authority every once in a while, and I want that to be in the story. I don't know yet how I'm going to go about it, but it's something that I had a very early idea on, and it's something that I've still been developing in my brain. So it's not fully realized yet, but I know I kind of want to do that, probably in a funny way too. I still want to keep the story funny. And by the way, something that I actually didn't want to talk about, but I probably could now because it's not really a part of the story. This like golden lotus thing was like a symbolic thing that was supposed to be associated with the main character. I'm not going to do that anymore, but it's still a cool visual. And actually, it was sort of in the books that this character, Sarah, would be reading. And so I'm going to be doing something similar, but the idea of the thing that I'm talking about being a lotus or being represented by a lotus is no longer going to be a thing, even though I still think it's a cool visual nonetheless. All right, so that is volume 4. And I had a realization by the time I was finished making this volume that my art had improved a lot compared to volume 1. But I still wanted people to read volume 1. And now that I was in high school, I was really insecure about the old stuff that I was writing. And so I wanted to share my work with my new high school friends, but I was too embarrassed about the way that my old volume 1 looked. And so in 2015, I decided to do my own personal revamp of volume 1, basically doing the same plot that I had written before. But with this one, it's literally just an art upgrade. And at the time, these pages looked really nice, but obviously, since they were done on regular paper, they've degraded over time. But the story was exactly the same with just that art upgrade. Oh my gosh, I still love this because this shaded villain character was in another room, and then this guy was on the other side of the wall, and he just pulled him out of that room. And you can see in that previous page how that sequence happened right there. In that room, he has like these shadow arms. He grabs him and just pulls him through the wall. And I love that because that's the type of action, or at least that's the flavor of action that I really want in my story. And in reflecting, I'm so glad that I can reflect on something like this, because making a drawing like this would have been so hard for me to do, even though I wanted to do it back then. And now I can probably get this done with the software that I use, Clip Studio Paint. It's a manga making software, if you don't know. I could get this panel done in a couple hours and have it, have background detail more fleshed out like that, have better proportions for these characters. The perspective would be better because I have, 1 point perspective for the hallway, but the way I understand perspective now, the characters would be in different positions at different sizes. So yeah, this was the original story of volume 1 that was fleshed out a little more. Kind of changed up some of the ways the characters would fight, but all in all, it was basically the same with that art upgrade. And even then, I started using more manga effects. You can see the lines on his face here, and I really like that. It was starting to feel more and more like a manga, not just like a middle school comic. All right, now volume 5. This is one of the my favorites because it was an arc where I wanted to really focus on the main character and this villain character. Not only did I want them fighting, be physical opposites of each other, I want them to have different values that caused them to think differently and also act differently and ultimately come to a clash. I think that's because I was really understanding the power of writing at this time. And again, 2015, I was in 10th grade, I believe. 2015. That also means I was 15 years old. I like this here because I added grass, but still very much a bare bones background altogether. I still need to learn more about building out like these backgrounds, especially for these establishing pages. Like I understood that this first page had to really establish the environment that they were in, but the way I would draw the characters has sort of evolved, even though this perspective was really bad. This panel right here was really good. And you can also see that from the beginning, I was inspired by Dragon Ball eyes, and I thought I was going to stick with that. But ultimately, I had to change that because it felt too derivative to me. I like that in this volume, the scale of the fights grow. So basically, they get transported to a different location, like in the mountains. And because like these abilities that the main characters wield are so powerful, they have the potential to like change like the landscape around them, you know? And I like that I can sort of play with that, and I start playing with that more. You can see like this pillar coming out of the ground, and it's at a distance, and Richard notices even though it's at that great distance because of just the nature of what's happening. Now, the issue I start running into at this point, and I was noticing it very early on, but I didn't make a decision about it because I knew what kind of decision I had to make until I graduated high school. But the problem I'm talking about right now is that the pacing of the story is way too fast for this to become like an ongoing manga series that would, you know, stand the test of time a bit, you know? You know, in their first encounter, they're already going into like talking to each other. And not that it's a bad thing for characters to talk to each other, but if you want the story to be more exciting, there has to be more of a pace to the story. And I was able to understand that as a kid by the end of me getting to this, because even though the battle was pretty epic for what I was able to make at the time, everything is pretty much resolved in this one fight. And what I want to do is be able to have multiple battles, you know, that take place over an arc of the story and not just one book, you know. But again, I still have really improved the art, specifically character art, because drawing backgrounds was something that I just couldn't afford to do with my time. And I really did need to improve my character art as well. So that was the big focus for me at that time. I had moments where I could really show the background, especially since these two characters are in the air and flying. I had an opportunity to show like mountains in the background. I like this shot right here. And it's something that I would probably even try to mimic now if I wanted to try to show this type of angle. Here, let me zoom in. This is like, I think the camera angle specifically is like a choker angle, but it has like this wide appeal to it because it's a very wide panel. So like you get the camera is like sort of looking down on him while he's looking forward. So you kind of see this destruction behind him, these like cracked rocks and ground behind him. And I think that's not only good visual storytelling, but it shows like the menace of this character, even though like we're sort of looking down on him, but we see his like determined and like angry facial expression. It really lets us know what kind of character he is just by looking at him. And with the context of the story that the reader will have, I think this really is a great panel that I was able to make. Again, I was 15 years old, so I had gotten a bit better. So yeah, I'm getting close to the end of the arc where we're close to defeating this villain, but it sort of happens not arbitrarily, But again, the pacing at this point was just like way too fast. The battle was like wrapping up. Even though I wanted to put stakes into it, he escapes from the confinement that these characters placed him in, just with like a demonstration of his own power. Again, a really cool panel, but because of the nature of the story pacing not going well, I actually don't like this. I might have something similar because this is, again, a really cool panel. It's kind of messy though. You don't really see which abilities he's using or breaking apart. So this is something that I probably will try to do again, but make it a little more detailed and improve the clarity of the actual action that's happening in the panel. Now, I really like the ending drawings of this volume because I'm getting closer to the style that I'm familiar with now. Definitely still a far ways away, but I feel the line weight that I like to do in these drawings. And actually on this page specifically, I don't know why, but this page specifically has a lot of the energy that I have now whenever I draw. And if I remember correctly, I had a really exciting ending page for this, but again, it's somewhere lost in these pages. Oh wait, here it is. I really like this ending page for the volume because it's a standoff between a character that we've really gotten to love and the main character, or the main villain of the story. And so he's not the protagonist. He's actually letting the main characters get away and kind of hold back this villain as they escape. And that's how I end that volume. Dramatic. And actually, we kind of get into the results of this little scuffle in the next volume. But it's something that I plan on going into again, so I'm not going to go into too much spoilery details about it. Just know that this little scuffle between this wielder and this villain wielder is probably going to be pretty epic, even though I still won't show a lot of it because there are more to both of these characters that I've initially revealed in the story at the time. But yeah, volume 6. The stakes are raised in this volume a lot, and it's an example of the way I want to raise the stakes in the story as it continues in this version of the manga as well. And you can see that it's getting closer and closer to this version compared to volume 1, and I kind of like that. Still had a lot of problems trying to construct characters. Like, what are these eyes doing? It's way too high up. I have like a sort of interesting pose with him sitting on a chair. I have this worried look from this character, Sarah. One of the elders is slightly involved in some of the stuff that's happening in this volume. But initially, it picks up at the end of this arc and sort of going over the consequences of that. More character development. I introduce more adult wielders instead of introducing more student wielders, because the World of Wielders is run by the adults that are more powerful and more capable of doing the task that a wielder does, which is protect humanity from, humanity destroying threats. Let's put it at that. I really like this panel right here. This was the end of the chapter. Let's just say this character got really messed up. But he's not dead. We learn more about the main villain in this. I like this panel right here because we have like this fire on the ground and like this sunset in the background. I don't know if you can really see it here. Let me see. There, this panel right here. Same location as before, but the sun is setting. So I sort of have like this gradation that is coming from where the sunlight would be. And then if I were to recreate this, I would definitely be able to really show what I'm trying to show now. But again, I was very much limited by the skill level that I was at back then. And the version of this comic that I'm making now is just going to be so much better because I really know how to draw now. I like this really menacing shot of the villain, sort of declaring that he's going to take over, blah, blah, blah. Typical villain stuff that I don't know if I'm going to stick with in my present day version of the story, but he is still going to be a menacing villain. His name is Pyro, and he's the wielder of fire, so you can already see where that could lead. This was something that I was finally going to do but I ended up going a different direction with it. But I started experimenting with different pencils and materials to make these comics. I forgot what kind of pencil this was, but it's very much a pigmented piece of, I think it was like charcoal. And I wanted darkness, like actual like darkness to be present in my comic. And so the blackness that I wanted really came from this charcoal pen. If I was really smart, I'd probably go with ink. But I think the reason why I didn't is because this was just printer paper. And so ink would have just gone right through it. And so if I inked this whole square, it would just go through like it already sort of has with the charcoal here. I don't know if you can see it, but you can see like dots of like charcoal that have like seeped in through the paper. And it would have been much worse if I started using ink. But I didn't know at the time. I was still in high school and I didn't really know about the different materials, including different types of paper that I could use to make comics. I like this panel right here. Actually, I like the sequence that I had leading up to these panels. Basically, I had this internal conflict that's happening with Richard. And it was something that I didn't really come up with until later, like around the time I was writing this story. But it's something now that's there from chapter 1 if you're paying attention to it. And I don't tell the reader outright why he has this internal conflict in this version, but it's still there in this version of the story. And the reason why has to do with him and the actual plot of the story. I really like having both external and internal conflict within my characters, because then the story gets more interesting. They start making different decisions that maybe one person would make because of their own internal and external conflicts, because that's how life works, I guess. And that's how good storytelling happens too. You know, one character makes a good decision because of this. One character makes a bad decision because of this. And conflict happens because of differing opinions and differing consequences to those actions. I really like this. At this point in the story, the elders are talking about sort of a summit or conference between various wielders around the world. And it's sort of like a Five Kage summit type thing that I was inspired by at the time. Again, this was 2016 now, with volume 6. And so this is supposed to be in the back of that. So yeah, this is 2016 now. And I think at the time, Naruto Shippuden was near its Five Kage Summit arc. So I like the idea of multiple characters that we have knowledge about in being in different locations, having to convene and talk about a greater threat that is on the horizon. Then I sort of introduce more student wielders that these elders and adult wielders are sort of their teachers of. And I want these student wielders to ultimately be the characters that really flesh out the world through their perspective, because the type of story that I'm telling is the one where we are experiencing the story through the lens of these student wielders. And yeah, it's a shonen story, so the main characters they don't have to be young, but I'm going with that because that's the tradition and what I like telling it with this story specifically. Now, volume 7, like I talked about before, is sort of like a gathering of many characters. Exploring a lot with showing new characters and their development, or establishing these new characters is a good word for it. But even before that, a fun thing that I did with this was a race between two characters that have the ability to move really fast. Their powers aren't the same, but they both have super speed. And so I kind of give them a race. You probably know by now the main character is the wielder of lightning. So with that, he has the ability to move really fast. But this other character specifically has powers that give him super speed. And so the race is sort of initiated between the two. And I was really excited to make this because I wanted to really I really wanted to improve my background drawings. And at this point, it's just a lot of trees that I was drawing. But nonetheless, I still like the vibe of it. And I'll probably still do something like this in the future. And the way I am now, the detail will be so much better when I do this. Sort of inspired by Attack on Titan, I have this like forest of giant trees that these characters jump around, still in the race. And what I like about it is that even though Richard can fly by the time he is in this story, but this other character can't fly. But he doesn't mind it because he's that confident in his own abilities that he thinks he can win the race anyway. And with his speed, he's keeping up with Richard just by bouncing around on the trees. And I don't know who's gonna win. They sort of reach the line at the same time, and I'm not gonna tell you. I don't know. When I redo this in the original story, the outcome could be different. I literally have not made that decision yet. I'll probably will do the race again, but yeah, stuff changes. So yeah, as these kids are having fun, or wait, actually before that, after the race, we get to meet some of these new characters that are different student wielders from, I guess, different parts of the world, even though I don't really have them like speaking any languages. In my mind, I guess they have accents, but I sort of need to diversify myself more to make these diverse characters. But in like these students like discussing with each other, they're actually really passionate about their roles as wielders, and they reference the history and the role of the wielders themselves. And it's sort of the introduction of the tone of the conflict of the entire story with this, because we're following the point of view of the students who are destined to take on this role of protecting humanity. And so the question is, are they going to take up that mantle, or are they going to use their powers for what they want to do? And it's a very early example of the conflict that is initially between two people. These two characters. What I really like is that these two characters are discussing it, but once the discussion gets physical, one of the girls push each other, and she's like, okay, bet, I'll fight you. All the other wielders, student wielders who have been like listening in on this conversation, as soon as they begin to square up, boom, everyone else steps in, willing to protect the person on their side. So I have Richard stop Tamari because he's like the closest person to her. And for me, these two characters are the closest to, she's the closest to her. But these characters that we have already known are willing to basically fight with Tamari. And then these characters that we don't know are willing to fight with her. And it's like this, boom, like they immediately move in, and it establishes this like tone of conflict that initially wasn't voiced, but is shown to the readers. And I really like that because this was an example of me showing off my visual storytelling skills and less of my dialogue. Even though the dialogue was there, there's this dialogue of these two characters having differing opinions. And when it comes to the point where they're trying to settle their differences with, their fists, in this case with her, literally, she like has the ability to like her body parts. And she's ready for that too. She's about to like freeze her. Everyone steps in, either about to stop the person from fighting or about to fight with the person that they're siding with. So as the students are, downstairs talking about to have a fight, all the adult wielders are upstairs having this civil conversation. They do attendance check with all of the leaders there, and then they talk about some of the stuff that's been happening within the past few chapters, or volumes, I should say, sort of laying out what's about to happen within these few next volumes that I was thinking about before I decided to do the final reboot that you should be reading right now. Then we cut back to them. The conflict kind of dies down because they were able to talk it out, but there's still a bit of tension, especially with this character. This character didn't stand up initially, but once he hears that Richard is like the most powerful wielder within their sector, he just like out of nowhere says that he wants to fight him. And so they have a little bit of a scuffle, and he's a character that I sort of want to do more with. I haven't fleshed him out too much since I initially came up with him back in high school, but he's a fun character that I think will end up being cool, especially since his powers will interact with Richards in an interesting way. That's another thing that I've been learning from One Piece. And again, when I first made the concept of my story, I didn't know anything about One Piece, but the way that One Piece does their powers is a lot similar to the way I want to do my powers, because each character that has a devil fruit that power is unique to them. And that same idea is what I wanted to do, and what I'm still doing with Striker X now. This is a really bad drawing. What even is a chin? Do you see that? Because what even is a chin? Here is the final volume of my high school comic. And as you can see, the logo is still the same one that I was pretty much using, even though this one is hand-drawn. Very similar to that logo that I'm using now. And so this would have been the year I graduated high school. So 2016, 2017. I graduated in the spring of 2017. So I also really like the way I was able to draw characters at this point. I still have ways to improve the way I draw characters and backgrounds, but in this volume, I reached a standard of drawing that I was really proud of, but I knew that I still needed to do more. And I decided when I was going to go to college, I was going to reboot the series from the ground up again. But even little details like the way I was coloring Richard's hair when he goes blonde, you can see just how much I've improved as an artist. And at this point, I had started painting, and so I had an understanding of color and value, more of an understanding of color and value, and that was sort of present in this cover illustration. But again, the interiors was still in black and white, still using pencil drawings. I had really upped my shading and my line weight, and even using it to a comedic effect. I have this moment where one of the elders creepily moves in, because this character Jacob, he's oh, would the elders really approve of us fighting? And she's like, oh yeah, competing with each other is the best way to train. And they're like, oh, okay. You can see here that I start really having a higher understanding of setting up panels dynamically. And at this point, I was also thinking about whether or not I wanted to make this into a webtoon or not. A webtoon with the vertical scrolling format. The story is right now going to be a manga again, but at this point in time, in 2017, I was thinking about whether or not I should, when I do reboot this, make this into a webtoon format rather than a manga format. Get a little bit of backstory with this character. I'm going to redo the backstory, but it's probably going to be a little bit more the same with just a little bit more stakes. He and his dad are a hunter, and then there's things that happen to make his character growth more visible. And I wanted to show this flashback rather than telling the audience about how his character had to learn to be confident. And so this is him declaring that his confidence gives him strength. But that declaration comes after we've seen his backstory with his dad. And by the way, this bang is them hunting together. He did not shoot his dad. A little bit of flight training. I love this panel, and I love this joke because one of the wielders, their ability is to transform into animals. But the training that they're going under is to learn to fly in their human forms. And so he's like, oh man. The main crux of this volume is actually a flight challenge between Richard and Jacob, or Jet. That's his alias or hero name, if you will. Even though they're not really superheroes, I just like the idea of I like the idea of these characters having other hero names to go by. So his is Jet. Obviously his is Striker. When I introduce it into this version of the story, I want it to make more sense when I do it. So I still actually need to think about how I'm going to introduce the idea of having aliases or hero names, because his is Striker. I just haven't introduced it into the story. But yeah, Striker and Jet, they're about to have a flight battle. And that's actually the main thing about the story. And this volume, I should say. It's an example of me realizing that I needed to slow down the pacing and really show these characters going through stuff. And so this is a training arc where he is learning to become a better flyer, against this guy named Jet, or Jacob, or Jet. And so they're going through this flight course that's deliberately made for them to difficultly fly through. And throughout the whole course, you are really wondering, is it going to be Richard or Jet that really makes it out? And by the end of the story, one of them beats the other. And that's all I will say about that. But yeah, at this point in time, when Volume 8 finished, I was graduating from high school and about to go into college, where I was about to make the decision to switch from engineering to animation. And I did one semester of engineering knowing that I still was an artist. But after that semester, I was like, no, I have to be an artist. And so I switched to animation, started to reboot this, and it's taking me a couple of years to completely redo it. Still not perfect the way it is now. Here, let me just put this here since I'm talking about it. So yeah, I rebooted this series, started developing it more, really taking time to really flesh out the writing and the world. And I'm really proud of what it is today. Again, if any of this was interesting to you, I'd love for you to follow my work and check it out if you'd like. You can subscribe here on the channel for updates. And of course, I really would love for you to read this comic on VoyceMe. If you vote for my series on the VoyceMe app or on their website, there's a chance that it will become an original story and I can start basically working closer to full time on this project. I probably would have to talk to the guys at VoyceMe about, what goes into that. But my dream is for me to work full time on this. And if you guys enjoy the story, please let me know, and also let the people at VoyceMe know by voting for this series to become a ongoing series published by them. And even if it doesn't, I'm still going to be publishing this on my own. That's just the type of thing that I know that will probably happen. It's a low chance of me, winning against so many other great stories, but I still believe in my own story. So even if I don't win VoiceMe's competition, I'm still going to be working on this story. I'm going to be releasing a physical volume for readers to buy. And I'm going to be, pushing on, because this, above everything else, is my baby. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed me going through the history of Striker X. Please subscribe to the channel for more info about this in the future, and I hope to see you in the next video. Thanks.